Alright guys, and welcome back to Armoured Warfare, and today we are taking out two of the collector's editions, the two brand new collector's vehicles that have been added to the game. The M60-2000 and the Challenger 1 Falcon. Now this video is not going to be exactly how I normally do it, not with the replay and then, you know, with the post-game stats and me chat about it. I've just got two straight up replays and I want to talk about these vehicles straight, because they're very expensive. What is it, 88, 90 odd euros for both of them? That's a lot of money just for two premium vehicles. Albeit, one's tier 7, one's tier 8, and they're collector's editions, they're quite cool. But 88 euros, I don't want to see it faffing, I want to tell you the facts straight about them. So the M60-2000 is the first vehicle we've got. It's a tier 7 premium main battle tank. It's based on an M60 hull with an M1A1 Abrams turret. Now that sounds alright. The turret is very thick. It's about 650mm of frontal turret armour. That's excluding all of the angling and armour plates and composites and whatever on the turret. And that is very strong for tier 7. I think it's actually impenetrable at tier 7 to any AP round and shaped charge rounds that may attempt to penetrate it. So the turret is very strong. The 120mm gun that it gets as well is the same gun that's on the Abrams. Now, it's got a decent reload. It's about 7 to 7.5 seconds, which is not too bad. 470mm of penetration. And on my setup with my retrofits, which is the Mark III intercoms, Mark III chrome barrel lining, and the Mark III augmented breech block, it's 0.07 degrees spread on the accuracy. That's not terrible, but it's not brilliant at the same time either. It's about average accuracy. So without those retrofits, the accuracy can be quite bad actually. It can be quite difficult to take people on at certain range. Damage are about 450 per hit. That's not too bad really. It's coupled with that 470mm of penetration actually gives it one of the highest penetration values at tier 7. It's the third highest, I think, trailing on behind the T80 and the Type 92, the two highest with penetration. So it's got very good penetration for its tier. Decent damage. It's got a decent DPM of about 2,700 damage per minute. Now, the big killer of this vehicle, I'll get back to some other points in a minute. I just want to put this straight out there. The big killer of this vehicle is the hull. The M60 hull at tier 7. Now, we see the M60 hull at tier 3 and tier 5. Now putting out tier 7 is really putting out a stretch. The engine in that little box there, the little armoured box, is very prone to being hit. I'm fairly sure a lot of decent players will go for the engine on this vehicle and will make this thing very difficult to play. The hull armour is not particularly strong. Now you may be forgiven for thinking that the frontal hull armour is 190mm after looking at the M60A3's hull at tier 5, but you'd be wrong. It's actually 320mm. So it is an improvement upon the M60, but 320mm is not going to be bouncing very much very often. Especially other tier 7 main battle tank guns, they're going to tear through the hull like hot butter through knife. It's going to be disastrous for you. Even the side of the hull is only 100mm. The rear of the hull, I think, is 43mm. So you're really not going to be bouncing anything. Side scraping in this vehicle is a no-go. The only tactic you can really use is hull down. Now, hull down is very useful for this vehicle because the turret allows the gun for 10 degrees of gun depression. Now, that is really good. 10 degrees of gun depression with this 120mm gun and this turret at this tier is very, very effective. And that's what I'm playing here with my friend Rydekk. Me and him, we're sitting hull down at the bottom of, what's this map? Pipelines, that's the one. We're sitting at the sort of below the refinery on the hills using it hull down, and it's very, very effective. Admittedly, we've only done 1,000 damage so far, but the amount of rounds that have flown our way and just bounced off the turret is quite extraordinary. Now, one of the big weak spots as well with the M60 hull is that the engine grills are on the back of the vehicle. Compared to, say, the Challenger 1 or the T-series of vehicles, their engine exhausts are on top of the vehicle, which can make it quite difficult when fighting on level terrain to get the critical damage off the engine. But with actually stationed on the rear, say if you're fighting weasels, for example, or VBLs, which are going to be very common at tier 7, they're autocannons. What is it? 30s, 20mm cannons. They're going to do at least 70 to 100 damage per hit when they're shooting into the engine deck. And it being an M60 hull means that the vehicle is not particularly good at traversing. The hull is about 20 degrees traversing, not very quick. The turret, I think, is only a little bit better at 33 degrees a second, which is not too bad, but considering those weasels and the VBLs are going to be behind you, leads us on to another dangerous point of this vehicle. This vehicle may have 10 degrees of gun depression over the front, but it gets nothing over the back. It cannot depress its gun over the back. And when I mean that, that's not an exaggeration. The vehicle gets 0 degrees of gun depression over the engine deck. So a Weasel or a VBL, which are very, very small vehicles, can easily come straight up behind you and sit right on the engine, which is going to make it very difficult for an M60-2000 to take them on. Other than that, I quite like it actually. It's got good credit potential, good reputation potential, and also it's quite an oddball of a vehicle. There's not really any vehicle in the game that's as mutant as this thing. An M60 hull with an M1 Abrams turret. It's a very, very odd looking vehicle. Now, taking on here, we've been hull down for most of the game. So now we're going to take on the LAV600, which is already dead, the Centauro, and the AMX-10 RCR. So the Centauro, sorry, did not put up much of a fight. Now, the 10 RCR is a different story. That's a tier 8 tank destroyer. Very, very capable at knocking us out. We are basically on full HP. We've only taken, what's that? 2 hits, one from the BMD4, one from an LAV600. Only then did it hit us in the cupola. So we're still on 2,344 HP, and, well, we killed him very, very quickly. So, guys, that's the M60-2000 basically in a nutshell. It's quite a fun vehicle to play, but it's going to take some getting used to due to its drawbacks and flaws, but it can work when in the right hands. So, on to our next game on Portstorm. This is the Challenger 1 Falcon. Another very odd-looking vehicle at that. It's got a very, very flat hull, but it looks like its head's been run over with a steamroller. It's very thin, very odd-looking machine. So, what do I think of the Challenger 1 Falcon? Well, I think it's quite a good vehicle. The armour is very strong. Now, I thought the armour would not be very thick, or, well, it wouldn't be thick, but it wouldn't be very good at its tier, simply because it's a Challenger 1 hull at tier 8. So, look at this. We're fighting tier 10s. 2 T14 Armatas. Those 125s and 152s they get can easily tear through this 500-600mm of armour with their 700 to 800mm of penetration. I'm not expecting much of this vehicle, and to be honest, in this game I wasn't expecting to do as well as I did. Right then, let's see what we can do. So we're going to go into the middle, which is good because the armour of this vehicle is... it's good enough, but I was really surprised at how thick it was. The turret is quite good for hull down. I think it's about 350-400mm thick on the front. But considering that the turret is very, very thin and a very small target to hit, that makes it quite difficult to shoot at in hull down positions. The hull, on the other hand, is massive, and it gets no era protection. As normally on the Challenger 1 and the Challenger 1 Wolf, you can get the era package mounted on the sides of the vehicle, which gives extra armour. This vehicle gets none of that, and it's a tier higher. Albeit, we still have a lot of HP though. 3,204. Now, my retrofit loadout on this vehicle, I think, was Mark III gyroscopic stabilizers, Mark III hull reinforcement, Mark III engine deck or engine housing, and Mark III intercoms. Now, this got the reload of the gun down to 6.96 seconds. Now, that's rather good for this 120mm gun. We're pulling off an average of 520 damage per hit, and I think this vehicle has about 540mm of penetration, so the gun is quite good. The accuracy is about 0.08 degrees or 0.07 degrees, depending on your retrofit loadout. Bearing in mind, I had no crew skills on my crews for these vehicles, and both of my commanders were Freya, because Freya is my favourite. She's my little bae whenever it comes to commander. Now, we took a hit in the side there, and that instantly knocked out my turret ring. Considering this was one of my first ever games in the Challenger 1 Falcon, I was thinking to myself, maybe the turret ring is quite weak on this vehicle, but that was the only shot I took this game, essentially. I didn't take any others. Most of the others all bounced, so I can't really judge until I've played the vehicle some more. Good point about this vehicle, though, unlike the M60-2000, is the engine grills are on top of the hull. As you see there, the engine grills are in sort of a U shape along the back deck, which means that if they get shot from above, you're going to take extra critical damage, which I think is plus 50%, plus 30-odd% to a crit hit on the engine deck, which is quite dangerous to these sort of vehicles, but it has a lot of HP, so we can take it. Now, look at the damage output of this gun, though. The reload time is not bad at all, but the accuracy, for an MBT, I would have loved to have had it a bit better, but there's not really any retrofits that I can put, so the accuracy is alright for now. Oh, 2067 damage. Not too bad. There's not really much I can say about the Challenger 1 Falcon. I didn't get as much of a feel to it as I did for the M60-2000. It's a bit more, it's much more of an oddball. It's not as mutant looking, but in terms of it actually having not as good gun depression, it doesn't well, I can say it has a better gun because it is a higher tier, but overall for its tier, the Challenger 1 Falcon doesn't actually seem as effective because it is a tier 7 hull at tier 8, which fights tier 10s. Now that is quite a disaster there. The M60-2000 on the other hand has a tier 5 hull, but it'll only fight tier 9 maximum, and has probably better armour for its tier compared to the Challenger 1 Falcon. Right then, there's not too much to talk about for this vehicle actually. So let me get on to my final summary bit then of these two vehicles. So, do I recommend the M60-2000 or the Challenger 1 Falcon? Well, that's completely dependent on your situation. There's no way I can say to you, don't buy it guys, it's hopeless, they're terrible vehicles, do not buy them, blah 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 blah, because they're not. The M60-2000 is they're both fun to play. They're both new vehicles, new play styles of playing, and they're both very odd looking. Both premiums as well and collector's editions. So if I was going to recommend buying them, if you were going to buy them, I would say if you had the money to buy one of them or both of them, then consider it. I do say that. Do consider buying them. They are good fun to play, and I have thoroughly enjoyed playing them, but if you're the average player and you only have a certain budget for the game, then I will say don't buy them because they're odd to play. And you only get 2 premiums out of, what was it, €88 for 2 premiums? But if you have the money and you're willing to spend the money on some new vehicles, then I do recommend them because they are quite fun to play. And as always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.